I would like to introduce Kevin Carey, who is the Vice President for Education Policy and Knowledge Management at New America and directs the Education Policy Program. Kevin has written news and feature articles for the New York Times, Washington Post magazine, for Time, and other publications. And he also edits the annual Washington Monthly College Guide. His book, The End of College, Creating the Future of Learning and the University of Everywhere, was published by Riverhead in 2015. And then prior to joining New America, Kevin worked as the policy director of education sector and as an analyst at the Education Trust and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. He has also worked for the Indiana Senate Finance Committee and as Indiana's Assistant State Budget Director. Kevin has a master's degree from the Ohio State University and a bachelor's from Binghamton University. And then I also want to introduce our colleague, Riker. Here we go. Riker Pastorkevich. And this is crazy because I asked Riker ahead of time, how do you pronounce your name? And I wrote it down, people. And then I can't even decipher my own code. Riker Pastorkevich is the Senior Communications Manager for the Education Policy Program and the Center on Education and Labor. He directs communication strategy, media relations, external partnerships, and brand visibility for New America's largest programs. Prior to joining these teams, he was the Senior Communications Associate for the International Reporting Project at New America. And before New America, Riker worked at the U.S. Department of State in Strategic Communication and Public-Private Partnership Management in the Office of Global Partnerships and the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. So please welcome Riker and Kevin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. As Raven was saying, I'm Riker. I'm the Senior Communications Manager for the Education and Labor teams here at New America, and I'm really excited to be talking about op-eds with you today. And so Amaya and Elena and Raven were saying that a lot of you have either published op-eds or are interested in writing op-eds and really talking about your programs and getting the word out to the world about all of the amazing work that you're doing and really telling these stories. And so we put together a little workshop today to help you do that, or to give you the tools to do that. So I'll start out with media relations and op-ed writing 101, and then I will turn it over to Kevin, who has a lot of deep knowledge in terms of writing for different types of outlets and audiences. And then from there, we'll turn it over to you and do a little bit more of a workshop style of writing to really hone talking points for your programs and sort of build out the narrative that you want to present to the world. In terms of media relations, it can be quite a fickle beast. And really, you have to think about the audience that you're writing for. So if you want to speak to a super broad audience, a place like the New York Times or the Washington Post might be the best outlet for you. But similarly, state level or sort of trade outlets like Education Dive or National Public Radio, or your local National Public Radio might be a better outlet for you to be placing your piece in. And even local business journals are often a really good place to look to. For example, Education Dive, all of you are practitioners here. They only accept op-eds from practitioners and professionals. So we're policy advocates and professionals, and so we can't place op-eds from the New America side in a place like Education Dive. But you all, that might be a really good outlet to sort of get the word out about your programs and all the great work that you're doing. You do have to do your research to find the right reporter or outlet and really think about the audience that outlet is serving. And then from there, sort of craft the narrative that you want to tell. So what is an op-ed and why are you writing it? It is a feature piece or an opinion piece. It's written by you, not a professional journalist, to really to highlight an important problem or issue area that you're working on. In this case, grow your own programs. It is an opportunity for you to provide an expert perspective to an audience that might not otherwise know about your, what you're doing or why it's important. Generally speaking, they're about 800 words, sometimes less, 700, sometimes a little bit more, closer to 1,000, but that's sort of the general range. We're thinking like 5 to 7 paragraphs. So how does it work? What does the process look like? Generally speaking, it can happen in many different ways. You can either pitch an idea in a couple of sentences to an editor, and then they will help you form the angle that you want to approach the op-ed from, and that's oftentimes the best approach, because then they can help sort of mold the narrative and to get you published and get you to get them to accept your op-ed or your idea. But you can also send a fully fleshed out draft, but there might be multiple rounds of edits depending on what the type of op-ed that they're looking for, and if it's serving the needs of their audience. Similarly, we don't love emails on Monday mornings or Friday afternoons, and neither do op-ed editors. So generally speaking, no earlier than Monday at noon, but Tuesday to Thursday is the best days to reach them. And then, like I was saying, the op-ed team will review your draft. Different outlets have different ways of approaching this. For example, the Washington Post always wants you to submit through an online form for the most part, unless you have a hyper-personal relationship with an opinion editor there. They have a lot of really good internal scaffolding for evaluating op-eds and whether or not it's a right fit for their audience. But other times you just email an editor directly. And then from there, they might pass, they might accept it, there'll be multiple rounds of edits, but always make sure that you ask for a timeline for publication to make sure that it's aligning with the needs and sort of like your level setting expectations on both ends. In your folders, you'll find an op-ed template as well as GYO talking points. This was a document created by my dear colleague, Julie, who cannot join us today. And this basically, this is by no means sort of like a hard and fast, like you must do it this way, but this is sort of a generic or general sort of format to help you as you're thinking about how to format your op-ed. So generally speaking, the beginning, you'll take like a 30,000-foot view, introduce the op-ed or the idea, the problem, what you want to convey to the audience. And then the talking points, and the sort of the second section there is you can employ statistics and facts to back up and really build out the sauce or the meat and potatoes of your op-ed. And then you always want to close with like what's next, a call to action. Why should this person care? This person who doesn't know a lot about GYO programs or what you're trying to convey. Similarly, as we say in the first bullet point, the most important thing is the human element. Facts and statistics are great to back up this narrative and story that you're trying to tell, but by and large, what you want is a human story, and you have that in spades with all of the really great work that you're doing all across the country. So I will now turn it over to my boss, Kevin, to give tips and tricks on and to talk about his experience for writing for various types of outlets, and then from there we will go into Q&A.
Hi, everybody. Let me just say, on behalf of New America, we're so glad to see you here and so appreciative that you've taken the time to come all the way to our offices here in Washington, D.C. We know there's extra layers to travel these days. But this is such an important part of our work, and you're such an important part of our work that we couldn't be more pleased to have you here in the office and just grateful to have a chance to spend some time with you over these couple of days. Everything Riker said is true. I won't repeat what he said, other than to just add a couple more ideas to get you really a sense of what the perspective is of the editor who's going to be deciding whether or not to publish what you want to write. And the kind of thought process you need to go through to get them to say yes, and then the thought process you need to go to actually write something that's interesting and compelling and will stick in people's minds, fortunately are kind of the same thing. But let me kind of break down that into a couple of pieces. Any op-ed has a a point to make, some information to provide, a perspective to advance. And you all have the advantage of having some really important, compelling stories to tell. So you have this substance, and you can't convince someone to write that, and you can't write it if you don't have something important to say. But there are two more questions that any editor is going to be either implicitly or explicitly asking themselves, and therefore asking you. And those are, one, why now? And two, why you? So the why now is really all about context. It's a very complicated world. There's a lot going on, right? You pick up your phone, look around, talk to your neighbors. There's an almost infinite number of things that people could be writing about and could be reading about. And so a lot of their job is to decide, what am I going to provide to my readers today, or this week, or on Saturday, or on Sunday? So you really have to focus first on that why now question. What is the context? What is the immediacy? It's not just why is this an important thing to talk about, but why today, or why soon? And there are different ways to talk about that. I think certainly one of them could be sort of a long-term and a short-term. We know that the long-term need to create new pathways into the teaching profession in a lot of our communities is a function of things that have been going on for quite some time in terms of the changing nature of our local communities and the kinds of students that we're here to serve, and therefore the kinds of people who are in a really good position to serve them. Then there's also the short term. All of the disruption that happened to our public education system and continues to kind of ripple through our system. I don't mean to put it in the past tense, because we all know it's not. Around the shutdowns and the pandemic and the reopenings and the continued public health challenges. We know that this event has been like a meteor strike that continues to cause tumult and ripples and things that you're all dealing with all the time. That's a good short-term context, right? And they both lead you to the same place, which is we need new ways to find the best, most motivated, most knowledgeable people to come in and do the single most important jobs you have in your community, which is to teach school children. So you can kind of combine the long term and the short term to really say, this is why we have to talk about this right now. This is why I can't wait. It's why people need to know. And then the second thing is why you? And this is actually really to your advantage, because frankly, editors aren't all that interested in the opinions of like some random guy who works in a think tank in Washington, D.C., right? If I was to kind of send something in to your state newspaper and say, I have some strong opinions about how they should get after teacher licensure in the state of Illinois, the editor would be like, why would I care what you have to think? You're not from Illinois. You don't really know anything about us. You're just like some guy with opinions. That seems to be your job. I'm not quite sure why my reader would have any particular interest, and I don't know what your experience really lends to these opinions that you say you have. All of you, on the other hand, very much have the specific knowledge and the specific authority to say, no, I can tell you why these ideas of mine are good and valid because I'm doing the work. I'm right here. I'm from this community. I know the students, I know the parents, I know the schools, I know the people. So, why now and why you? And then when you sit down to kind of write this op-ed, and we'll kind of, during the workshop, Riker and I will be walking around and talking about kind of how to work through the template and everything. Those two things are also often the beginning of what you have to write, right? The first thing that you want to do, again, both in convincing the editor, but then also convincing the reader, because you're all readers, right? You pick something up, maybe it's in the newspaper, maybe it's on your phone, you read the first couple paragraphs. Part of you is saying to yourself, am I going to keep reading? Is this interesting? Is this worth my minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes? So you really have to kind of grab people right away. You have to connect to the experience that they have, particularly people who aren't educators, who don't know what you know. That's the whole reason that they're engaged in this transaction with you, is to kind of learn things that you learn. So you want to really focus on that why now, that sense of urgency, and then ground the story in your personal experience. I'm a teacher, I'm a principal, I'm an administrator. Here's what I see. Here's something that happened to me. People are always interested in stories. We all kind of like live our lives in a sense of story, right? And so rather than kind of talk abstractly using jargon or buzzwords or anything like that, tell a real story, a short one, because as Riker said, you only have about 1,000 words. But if you can take a little time to talk about real people who are experiencing real things, have real needs, have real priorities, that's much more interesting and compelling to people. That is going to grab them, both the people who are deciding whether to let you write for them, and then also the people who are deciding whether they want to read what you have to say. And once you set that context, and once you start to sort of explain who you are and tell that story, then it all, I think you'll find, can come pretty naturally. You'll know the statistics, you'll know the needs, you'll be able to kind of cite the larger context, you'll be able to talk about why this is not kind of a narrow concern, but a very broad one. You'll say all those things, and pretty soon you'll be at word 800, word 900, and just finding a way to kind of wrap it up in a way that will resonate with people. But those are the things that I would encourage you to think about, both as you engage in what can be sort of a idiosyncratic and a little bit of a hit or miss process of reaching out to people and finding the right editor and the right publication, and then when you sit down to put pen to paper and actually sort of tell the story that you want to tell. So I'm going to stop there, and then what's next on the agenda? Q&A. Oh, Q&A. Okay, great. I will sit here and then. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Questions. And this is for either Riker or I, so I'll just sit here.
Our CEO says that we have to wait like 1 minute before you have to like learn to live with silence.
Yep. I mean, I think often, if you're not like there's usually a little bio thing at the end of any kind of op-ed. You know, such and such is a such and such and such and such. You can just add a little statement there. You know, these opinions are their own, don't represent the views of. I think rather than try to work that into the text, which is kind of awkward, it can just be a part of your statement of who you are that will come at the end of whatever you write. This one's working right here. You guys want to grab that one?
I can talk about it.
Yeah.
So I've written a couple of op-eds, and what do you do about the haters? You know, when you because that's hard. Like I wrote one last year, and I then went and read all the comments, and I had to everything was
Yeah.
crushing. You know, and so I guess maybe that's just something to acknowledge for those of you that are going to write op-eds, that you will get, most likely people that are going to be writing back to you online are not going to be people that are in favor of what you wrote necessarily, because those people aren't going to take the energy to write. And so that's, just what are your thoughts and comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to have any illusions about the nature of like online discourse in 2022, and you know, certainly don't read the comments as a valid approach, and I often don't read the comments for exactly that reason. I mean, it's tough because sometimes people have some really thoughtful perspectives, and you appreciate people taking the time to read what you have to say, and even if that's only like maybe a third of them, it's usually not, I think there will be some folks where you say to yourself, did you read what I wrote? I tried really hard to be clear. I said exactly that, and it's as if I said a whole other thing. And, it's just public forums are a place for people to often say what they already had in their minds, not necessarily to react in a constructive way to what you had to say. So it's just kind of a question of, what's your state of mind that day? Are you in the mood to filter out the haters to get to the thoughtful people? But if you're not, you have no obligation. Don't feel like you're not doing your job if you just say, I'm not going to engage with that kind of energy today. That's fine.
State level versus local versus a national. How do you pick that audience? Like, what are the sorts of questions that I should keep in my head? Like, am I going to go for like my local rag, right? My local weekly, or am I going to go for the state daily, or something national, right? So what are the, or maybe like a trade publication, right? What are the sorts of questions I should ask about choosing that venue?
Yeah, so I think you want to really think about who you're writing for. Are you writing for policymakers? Are you writing for teachers, administrators? And then think about the outlet that's serving. So for example, if you want to reach a practitioner audience, maybe a place like Education Dive is the best place for that, because generally speaking, administrators and other decision makers in schools and in education are reading Education Dive. So that's something, but if you are trying to do something big and grand, like change hearts and minds across the country or really bring attention to this issue, a more national publication that's going to get that volume and that circulation is a better fit. Sometimes also you might want to start small and work your way up. So if you're sort of constantly publishing on a similar topic, it loans legitimacy. If you start small and maybe you have a relationship with your local rag or an editor there, and then that loans legitimacy to do a state level publication with maybe a state angle, and then from there gives you even more legitimacy when you're trying to get it in like the Washington Post.
Yeah, everything Riker said is right, and I would say also your why me statement is going to stay the same, but you need to change the scope of your why now statement to fit the scope of the publication, right? So if it's at the state level, then you have to talk from the perspective of the whole state and the whole state's school system and the whole state's need for teachers, whereas if it's more local, it's not. So every publication has its boundaries, and you want to make sure you fill them in terms of how you create the context for why what you have to say is important.
Do you think there's a higher chance of getting your op-ed recognized if it's written in collaborative, like with other, like if 3 or 4 teachers wrote an op-ed together and signed it, right? Is that more powerful?
One second. Alyssa, can you repeat that into the mic so that the recording can pick it up?
Okay, so my question is, what is there a bigger likelihood of your op-ed being published or getting picked up if it's published by more than 2 or 3, authors co-writing, like if there were 3 teachers that wanted to advocate for something?
Yeah, actually, probably the opposite. Editors generally like one byline because they like the idea of a specific personal perspective. They've got their regular columnists who they read, who all develop kind of a certain voice, right? You're not reading a news story. You're reading a point of view, and any point of view is a person's point of view. And so if it's just you, then you can kind of more cleanly articulate that in a way that's not complicated. Whereas if it's a bunch of people, just the fact of multiple authorships sort of muddles that. So I would it's a little tricky if you have multiple contributors because your best shot might be just to pick one person and have them be the one who contributes.
It's also incredibly difficult to get an op-ed down to 800 words if you're writing with 4 people.
Just a logistical question two-part question too. Riker, to your point about submitting one op-ed or to one outlet at a time, can you speak more to that versus like what prevents me from emailing 6 outlets at once and just seeing whoever gets it gets it? And then Kevin, I'm wondering, have you, the part where you say about the why now, have you ever had an op-ed where you submitted it and you know the why is urgent, they don't, and then did you ever just resubmit it a month or 2 later and then they did publish it? And the reason I bring that up is I actually wonder if the educator shortage thing, we've been talking about a lot, like come September, October, everyone's gonna realize how bad it is. And I wonder if some people aren't there yet, even though they should be.
Logistically speaking, if you send it to 6 editors at once and 2 of them accept, then you have to turn one of them down, and then they will never publish anything that you write ever again. So you can send it to 6 people, but only 1 at a time, and until 1 accepts. So that's why, and you have to kind of take turns. And you can also say, like, if I don't hear from you by, you submitted on Tuesday morning, if I don't hear from you by the end of the day on Thursday, I'll just assume it's a pass. That's totally fine.
Yeah, so Riker's exactly right. They get mad if you do that. It's just a fact. I'm not justifying it, but they don't like that, and which is hard because a lot of them also have a habit of not responding in a timely manner, right? Or just turning it down by just saying nothing and like ghosting you. So it's just you have to steel yourself for a little bit of frustration, most likely, if you're going to kind of get into it. But it's fine to follow up in a pretty short amount of time. Because here's the thing, if they really like it, they'll actually usually respond pretty quickly. They usually won't wait a month and then say, yes, this is the thing that I want to publish. It just means that they've got a stack of stuff and it didn't grab them for whatever reason. Again, there's like lots of things on people's minds and things that it's just, there's no way to know from the outside. So I would just, have a priority list, start with your most favorite one, give them a week, follow up once if they don't. And if you follow up once and they don't respond, you're certainly free to then go to someone else and they can't reasonably come back and say, oh, well, you were just be reasonable about it, but work in order. In terms of like resubmitting and all the rest of it, sure. There's no reason not to. Being friendly and persevering is a good state of mind for kind of doing this sort of thing, because there's a million things going on the other side of it, and there are 20 other people who have 20 other things in areas that we don't even spend much time thinking about because we're in the education business that are maybe just as urgent. Or some huge national news event happens that just changes everyone's perspective, and for a few weeks, all we're going to be talking about is this thing. So it's kind of, there's an element of luck and an element of just kind of waiting, and then, but when something happens, and have your antenna up, right? If something happens that actually is your national news event, and you've already kind of done a good job of crafting your message, you can be right on top of it, and they'll have something really good to run like the next day. That's great, if you can put yourself in that position. And so sometimes it's sort of waiting for the right time and then being right there with a compelling story to tell.
Yeah, and we've actually had that happen to us before, where we had an op-ed, plenty of editors rejected it, but the why now changed, something in the news cycle changed, and so we literally just changed a couple of sentences in the introductory paragraph to make it more relevant to what was happening now, and then it was accepted. And if you ever wonder how people like publish things on CNN like 10 minutes after a big news event happens, it's because like most of the paragraphs are already written, and then they just change the introduction or conclusion to fit the moment.
It's about the term GYO or any such this is about using the term GYO or some such broad term. We have others that we use. How to handle that when what you're really trying to do is convey what it's about. It feels like it would be less important to have that moniker, but we tend to do that. Like I see a lot of examples of that where people describe a GYO program as a partnership between blah, 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 and then people probably miss the moment or miss the importance or significance of what it is. So I guess the question is about whether it's worth it as this group thinks through trying to advocate for more support and just more awareness around GYO programs, how you might get around that. GYO programs do a lot, right? I mean, they do a lot. So we've even here struggled with crafting, and you know this, Riker, how to do that. So thinking about that, how would you advise someone writing an op-ed about a GYO program? You're trying to capture a lot at once.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you don't want to seem like you're selling something. And the capital letters in GYO are a bit of a brand in a way, right? And brands are things that we sell. So I think there are certainly, I imagine, ways to get your entire message across without ever using an official phrase that's very useful in these kind of settings and communities, and to of people who sort of think about these things all the time for building an identity. But if you're communicating to sort of the general public, stay as close to the ground as possible. Just plain words, real people, real situations. Anything that even hints at kind of jargon and abstraction is just going to start to set off alarm bells in an editor, because it's not what people want to read, and it's not what people find to be compelling.